Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Some members of Garden River First Nation are demanding transparency from their chief and council. It's all over the payout of funds received from the Robinson-Huron Treaty annuity case settlement. Protesters gathered in front of the band office on Thursday, with one demonstrator saying she plans to stay there until their concerns are addressed. APTN's Mike McDonald reports.
But I'm very proud of everyone here, just so you know.
Renee Bello is a member of Garden River First Nation located east of Sault Ste. Marie. Bello contends the concerns of her community are not being heard with regard to the payout from the Robinson-Huron Treaty settlement with the federal and provincial governments.
The main issue is to hear the people in what they want. We do feel that the money is our ancestors' money, and we should have a say in that.
Protesters have been coming and going throughout the day. Some say they wanted to see a 100% per capita payout of Garden River's share of the $10 billion settlement, which amounts to roughly $610 million. But $200 million has been put into a trust fund. Others would like to know what the community's leaders intend to do with the money that was not distributed.
The traditional chiefs of the Robinson-Huron Treaty signed that treaty, and they wanted us to have that money so we can all have a better life.
You're playing with people's lives here. You know, we've got some of us that are getting older in our days. We need something to make it a little bit easier on us. You know, our kids need something to know that and there's no plan for nothing to do with it other than we're going to put it away and take it away from you.
Chief Karen Bell was not present for this week's protest as she is attending a gathering of the Chiefs of Ontario. Councillor Travis Jones met with the protesters on council's behalf. Jones says while he applauds their passion, the protesters do not speak for the entire community.
Our community goes beyond the people that protest, and that's one thing that is tricky for our leadership is we have very vocal members that want 100% payout. Our leadership feels, along with many community members, that doesn't align with the case. The case was about righting a historical wrong, righting the wrongs individually and the collective.
Jones gave no specifics about how the rest of the settlement would be spent. Meantime, Bello and her supporters say they've heard this all before, and they still feel they are not being heard.
We've had meetings in the past where these words have been said. He knows my point of view, and I know his point of view. My people's point of views is a little important here, so I think they need to be heard, and this is their chance to be heard.
Somebody has got to stand up. Somebody's got to have a voice, and somebody's got to listen. That's the worst part. There's nobody listening up until this point. So, well, we're going to get loud, and hopefully we don't have to do any more than that. But some of us are had enough.
Renee Bello says she plans to remain on site for the remainder of the work week. She adds further protests are in the works, including a plan to completely block entrance to the band office, which could happen as early as June 24th. Mike McDonald, APTN National News, Sault Ste. Marie.
Thanks, Mike. To the ongoing fight over Bill C-5, Kahnawake Grand Chief Cody Daibo went to Ottawa on Wednesday to protest the legislation. It would allow the federal government to identify infrastructure projects of national interest, accelerating the approval process through a single permit. The Grand Chief says he attended the protest on Parliament Hill to show solidarity with all Indigenous people across Turtle Island. Daibo calls this legislation typical of the Liberal government. The Grand Chief says he made multiple attempts to contact the Prime Minister's office to request a meeting to discuss Bill C-5. He received a response yesterday stating that a meeting is not possible at this time. Daibo says there are concerns over how the bill could affect Kahnawake.
The concern for us is, are they going to be trying to push through other projects through here? Things that have happened in the past will not happen again. And then it kind of pits us against the general population, because then we're going to have to rise up and do actions. And we don't want that either at the end of the day, but we will defend our land and our rights to the utmost. So these are the concerns that we have. That's just the broad view of this bill. It's not clear, and the definitions are way too broad that you can just fit anything under the guise of national interest or prosperity.
We'll have more on Bill C-5 later on in the show on the Truth in Politics panel. Earlier this week, the G7 summit was held in Kananaskis, Alberta. Although talks have ended, Indigenous leaders are calling for Indigenous voices to be heard in future events. Video journalist Rachel May was at the summit and has more.
We're the first people. We know what we need. We know what the issues are. Leadership has been saying this for a very long time. Obtaining our fair share of the wealth, our fair share of the lands and the resources. It's reasonable.
Kara Curry-Hall is a strategist from Musqueam, Alberta, who advises Alberta chiefs on issues affecting Treaty 7. She says the way G7 organizers tried to treat Blackfoot Confederacy chiefs was unacceptable.
I asked them to actually dress up in full regalia and show up at the airport to greet international leaders. So they've removed them from a potential discussion participation level to a prop.
Curry-Hall says Treaty 7 leaders should have a seat at events like the G7 because issues like natural resources and Alberta separatism impact treaty rights.
There's a fire in the belly of these chiefs, and they are willing to defend and stand up and raise their voices and defend their rights.
First Nations groups in Canada and the U.S. are also facing pressure from tariffs, global conflicts, and the resulting economic strains. Ken Hall is a member of the 3 affiliated tribes in North Dakota. He owns land with oil deposits under it. He says participation in G7 events is essential.
60% of the natural resources needed in the United States of America are on Native American land. Now you look at globally, 57% of the natural resources needed globally are on Indigenous land. So they have to figure out that they got to come to us and talk to us if they want our resource, they want to extract them. And so I think to bring us to the table, that's what we're trying to get to. Let's talk.
Ken's daughter Faith also has oil, and she has ties to Musqueam and the 3 affiliated tribes.
For me, what I see is that Trump doesn't want to work with tribal nations. He wants to go around them. He wants to exploit the land as much as possible without the permission of anyone.
Faith says there needs to be tribal voices at tables like the G7 when discussing anything involving tribal lands.
What makes a world leader and the thing is that they oversee a sovereign nation. So then that brings into question, why are not all of our tribal leaders here? Because they oversee and govern sovereign nations over this entire country.
Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
It's Thursday, and that means our Truth in Politics panel is here. Jennifer Negon and much more coming up after the break. Welcome back. The rhetoric over legislation to get projects in the so-called national interest off the ground is heating up. One First Nations leader is promising a long, hot summer if the federal government passes Bill C-5. That's our topic on this week's Truth in Politics panel. Jennifer Leywitz is the CEO of Pasqua Strategies, and Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer Negon, thanks for being with us. Jennifer, lots going on with Bill C-5 as the Liberal government looks poised to pass this legislation no matter what. What do you expect the reaction from First Nations to be?
Well, I think we're already seeing that the reaction is not positive. I think, this is a really interesting start to the new government out of Carney. I'm seeing a lot of nations that are obviously upset, lack of consultation, and how quickly it's being rammed through, and only having access to the full text of the legislation a week prior to it being moved through Parliament. I think post it passing, we're also going to see nations very upset, but how quickly we'll see that be diffused is still up in the air. But I think there's also nations out there right now that maybe don't understand fully the implications maybe of this, because there hasn't been enough time to fully go through what this legislation is, what impacts this might have, and even for nations to speak to their legal teams or their elders or knowledge keepers about the long-term effects of legislation like this. So I think it's even hard right now for nations to even publicly comment or respond in a super meaningful way when they're still even trying to figure out what does this fully mean for us.
Nigon, it's a double whammy for First Nations in Ontario who are also dealing with Doug Ford's Bill 5, which is passed. Alvin Fiddler, the Grand Chief of Anishinaabe Nation, which represents 49 First Nations, saying if this federal legislation is passed, it will be, quote, a long, hot summer, saying First Nations will not sit idly by. Should the federal and Ford governments take it seriously?
Well, Doug Ford only followed the tone set by Mark Carney. And Mark Carney was the one who came in who said we need to get these projects done quickly, efficiently, as within 2 years we have to pass this new bill by Canada Day. And Doug Ford simply just jumped the gun, said, I'm going to get my own bill done, and followed the lead. And of course, he'd been trying to do that for quite a long time, but he knew he had the political capital to be able to do it because he was following the tone of the Prime Minister. What you're hearing here is a sigh of like, here we go again. And it's the same old cycle over and over and over again, where Canada has grandiose plans, implements those plans in some way or another, either through a bill or through a private consultation or proposing a project of the national interest. And then suddenly, a First Nation says, hey, slow down a minute, or what does this mean for us? Or we got our people, we got to look at it. And then you're deemed as not being in the national interest, that you're somehow the enemy to the economic agenda of the country. First Nations are not the enemy. First Nations are your best partners. Métis communities, Inuit communities are your number one champions. There's nobody that comes to the table more to want this country to be successful than First Nations, Inuit, Métis governments. And yet they're constantly put in these positions of being ostracized, marginalized, and then treated as the oppositional to these bills simply because they want to be involved. They want to be at the table, and they want to be included in the consultation for this. And I wrote about this week, I see a lot of conflict coming, and that conflict that's coming is people are organizing, and most importantly, people are not going to tolerate bills that will be, or projects that will be hammered down their throats. And those things that, how much do we pay you, is just not a formula that's going to work. It's how much do we include you, which has just not been a part of the conversation, including this bill.
The National Chief spoke to the Senate about the bill, but Jennifer, some First Nations, in particular Mikisew Cree First Nation, Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation, have called out the AFN and the National Chief over this. Can you enlighten us on what that's about?
Yeah, I saw a letter, actually. It's been circulating all over social media, but I think it actually came out a couple weeks ago. Chief Sheldon Sunshine and the chief of the other nation had basically explicitly said that the AFN actually doesn't speak on behalf of all nations. And kind of the end of the letter sounded almost like a warning, like this is the last time we're going to remind you of this. I think it is incredibly important for people to remember that the AFN is not a government. They are not the rights holders. They are a lobbying and political organization, and they're operating essentially like a corporation or an organization would. The issue is that the government, I think, just tries to bypass the complexity of nations and what it looks like to deal with different types of nations across the country. And I think they like to go directly to the AFN and say, well, we negotiated on this or we negotiated on this. Things are great. The issue is that we're almost seeing like one political head at the top of this organization trying to apply one size fits all solutions and getting involved in the drafting of legislation and even the negotiations around child welfare. But this is somebody that is not representative of the rights holders on a direct nation. And it's getting really tricky because at the end of the day, the AFN has had a really hard time separating themselves politically from the government. There's been people saying they don't know where the AFN ends and the government starts. Our AFN national chief, the hard truth is that she has been politically involved in the past with the Liberal Party, having been the former president of their Indigenous Liberal Association. It is very difficult for people to trust you fully and to not hold you and your feet to the fire when you have been politically involved with the same government that is now attempting to pass this legislation that is trampling over rights. And I think the government also has a duty to remember that the AFN, again, are not the rights holders, and you cannot just bypass what a nation wants out of consultation protocols, what they map out as their traditional territories, and go straight to the AFN and say, well, we're good, we did what we needed to do. But there's also some form of responsibility placed on the AFN as well to recognize their role and respect the nations and their leadership. our leadership on our nation should not have to come out publicly like that with a letter that threatening, saying like, back off, we've had enough. But that's exactly what happened.
We're going to speak a whole lot more about this and about some comments that Doug Ford is apologizing for now over on the podcast, but we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thanks to you both.
Jimmy Clutch.
Still to come tonight, part 4 in our series on indigeneity in the music industry. Stick around. Starting on the East Coast, soggy and 23 in Halifax, 24 with showers in Fredericton, 17 in Kuujjuaq, 9 in Nain, 24 with rain in Montreal, 23 in Val-d'Or. Showers and 22 in Sault Ste. Marie, rain and 25 for Ottawa. Cloudy and 19 in Thunder Bay, 25 with showers in Sioux Lookout. Sun's out and 24 for God's Lake, Thompson, Norway House and the Paw. 28 with showers in Winnipeg, rain and 23 in Barons River. 25 with showers in Regina, 23 in Saskatoon. Sunny and 19 in Uranium City, rain and 21 in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 19 in High Level, 20 in Fort McMurray. Showers and 19 in Edmonton, 14 with rain in Lethbridge. Showers and 15 in Vancouver and Victoria, 24 in Kamloops. 21 with rain in Prince George, showers and 20 in Smithers. 27 in Old Crow, 24 in Whitehorse. 14 in Yellowknife, sunny and 22 in Norman Wells. 3 in Sax Harbor, 26 in Fort McPherson. 3 in Cambridge Bay, 5 in Chesterfield, 5 in Resolute and Arctic Bay. The plastic crisis is much bigger than just litter. From toxic fumes to microplastics, Indigenous peoples are raising the alarm about the potential dangers of global plastic pollution. Coming up this week on a special hour-long episode of APTN Investigates, the team takes a microscopic look at the issue to find out exactly how Indigenous rights are being upheld. Here's a preview.
Every minute, 1 million plastic bottles are purchased globally. Bottles that will further poison oceans, ecosystems, and bodies. Microplastics have been found in the placentas of healthy women. Think about that for a minute. We are literally raising a generation that starts its life polluted before taking its first breath.
Because plastics are not biodegradable, they break down into pieces smaller and smaller and smaller, and all of those plastics have chemicals as well. This is a crisis of a very big scale because the longer we wait, the more plastic is produced and the more the world has to deal with.
We are stewards of Turtle Island. Water is life. I don't need to tell you that.
We are rights holders and knowledge holders and critical partners in the fight against plastic pollution.
All we want is health-based changes.
We need to protect our water in order to preserve, that life for future generations.
The microplastics has, basically colonized the entire planet, and it has turned all of us into sacrifice zones.
Looks good. You can catch APTN Investigates Sacrifice Zones airing this Saturday night on APTN. Well, this week we've been hearing the insights of artists who have faced pretendian accusations and call-out culture head-on. Tonight on our 4th segment of Face Value, some seasoned Indigenous music professionals provide advice rooted in culture and community care. Here's APTN's Veronica Blackhawk with more.
Took my identity, I'm taking it back. I am Anishinaabe, I belong to the land.
Leonard Sumner is a rapper from Little Saskatchewan First Nation, Manitoba. Desiree Dorian is a Cree country musician from Dauphin, Manitoba. Both are renowned trailblazers in the Indigenous music community. The artists shed a light on our view of false identity claims.
I think it's super important for young people to have an understanding of who they are and to be able to see themselves represented fairly. But at the same time, indigeneity and the face of it has always been shifting. I feel like a lot of people are realizing how important it is to protect our identity, but at the same time, we're still picking up the pieces in the puzzle of who we are as a people.
Leonard suggests taking a step back to process how our collective loss of culture adds to the confusion, bringing us to the root of the cause.
The way the music industry operates is they like one voice to be the punctuation for everything. When you don't have a genuine experience on a platform speaking the truth, it just makes room for a lot more lies.
While the public is determined to police Indigenous identity fraud, our communities still welcome newcomers.
People can participate in respectful ways, that they don't have to become the main voice. There's not one voice for community. We're just one of many.
Greta, don't you get that gun now? Greta, don't you get that gun?
In recent years, Desiree Dorian's seen a push for accountability in Indigenous spaces. However, the wider industry of non-Indigenous professionals are slow to catch on.
What we're seeing a lot in festivals right now across Canada is buyers are booking Indigenous artists who are quote-unquote palatable to their audiences. We don't often see brown faces being presented at festivals.
Desiree acknowledges that cultural identity is more than skin deep. Understanding our individual histories can help us see where we fit into these spaces.
I can travel fairly easily in Indigenous and non-Indigenous worlds. And I think about that conversely with my, brown-skinned relatives. And I think if you know who you are and you know where you come from and you know where you're going, then there's no reason to be guilty about the space that you're taking up.
In terms of non-Indigenous adoptees looking to benefit from Indigenous opportunities, the musicians clap back.
Just because you're adopted into a family doesn't necessarily mean that you adopt all the hardships and all the history with that. You don't carry that baggage in the same way that your adoptive family does. I mean, we have so many issues in our communities, and if you want to tell a story about one of those issues that you don't have a connection to, you might want to rethink that.
And we don't need anybody to speak for us on our behalf. We're more than capable of telling our own stories.
For non-Indigenous folks seeking direction on this topic, Desiree suggests connecting with a trusted member from your surrounding Indigenous communities. Avoiding the conversation can alter the credibility of your platform and cause real harm to Indigenous people. Learn more about the network of Indigenous professionals who are taking a holistic approach to protecting these spaces tomorrow on the final segment of Face Value. Veronica Blackhawk, APTN National News.
Thanks, Veronica. And Veronica will wrap up her Face Value series here tomorrow night. It's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.